This is a story about spiritual awakening between the world and eternity. On a quiet night, where even the crickets were reluctant to chirp and the leaves refused to sway in the wind, I lay down on the cold, old floor. My body wanted to rest, but suddenly I felt light, so light that I began to float. When I looked down, I saw my own body lying still. Startled, I wondered, is this a dream? Is this death? Before I could process what was happening, a gentle hand touched me. A whispering voice called, "Come, follow me." Instantly, I was carried away, flying through the cold night air until I arrived at a strange yet familiar hillside. There I saw faces I once knew, but they had long since left the world. They walked without glancing at me, busy with their own affairs, among wooden houses lit by oil lamps. There was no modernization, no hustle and bustle of civilization, only serene stillness. The sky above was a dim blue, as if night and morning had merged into one. "This is the spirit world," a voice within me spoke. I was shocked, for it was not my voice. Faintly, I saw an elderly woman floating beside me, smiling with kindness. I recognized her. She was still alive in the world, yet here she was. In my confusion, she took my hand and led me upward, through a thin mist to a higher place. "Come, don't linger here. This is not your destination," she whispered softly but firmly. We soared through clean white clouds until I arrived at a place that seemed to float in the sky. My feet stepped on something soft, but when I looked down, there was no ground, only white mist enveloping everything. A gentle voice called me, one I knew so well. I turned and saw a woman dressed in an ancient kabaya. My grandmother. She had long passed away, yet now she stood before me, smiling as I remembered. I wanted to approach her, but the voice within me warned, "Do not cross the boundary. Respect this place." My grandmother bowed respectfully to the figure who had brought me, then turned toward a large, long meeting hall. I was allowed to follow her, but with one message: respect them. Bow without touching. Along the way, I saw many halls lined up, where people sat solemnly listening to the teachings of their elders. There were no plants, no animals, only white clouds stretching as far as the eye could see. The atmosphere was peaceful, filled with tranquility, with only a gentle breeze brushing by. Arriving at the main hall, I was greeted by an elderly man I had never met, but my heart knew he was one of my ancestors. Around him sat those I recognized, including my father, who had passed away 10 years ago. They were all dressed in white, and I stood alone before them. We spoke at length, but only one person conversed with me. It was as if there was an unwritten rule in this world. Only the eldest ancestor could deliver the message. I don't remember all of our conversation, but one thing remained in my heart: gratitude for visiting them. Suddenly, everyone bowed, and the figure who had brought me reappeared by my side. I said my goodbyes, and my body shot upward again, piercing through the higher skies. We arrived at a strange place where lands floated like islands in the air, layered and tiered, reminding me of childhood fairy tales. "This is the heavenly world," the figure said. On each floating land, there were luminous beings who noticed my presence, but only watched from a distance. We continued to ascend until we stopped at one of the floating lands. I was instructed to bow and pay my respects. When I glanced forward, I saw a radiant being whose light was so bright that I couldn't clearly make out its form. After paying my respects, we shot through increasingly white and pure clouds until we reached a mountaintop. There stood a place made of stone or gleaming metal, roofless, floating in the air. "This is your place, but it is not yet your time." I floated into the place, greeted by figures in white robes. They moved gracefully, speaking through the mind without sound. In the center, there was a seat that felt so familiar, as if I had longed for it for a long time. I wanted to approach it, but suddenly the voice that had brought me warned, "Not now." Instantly, several figures stood in my way, not touching me, but their energy gently pushed me to the edge of the floating floor. They did not look at me, only bowed respectfully. Then my hand was held again, and in an instant I fell, plummeting downward at an incredible speed. I passed through clouds, sky, and earth, descending through layers of darkness. Between those layers, I saw figures marching toward gaping caves. The sounds of weeping and wailing pierced my heart. I fell deeper until I finally landed on hard ground. The air here was red hot and filled with unimaginable sounds of suffering. "This is the place of punishment. This is darkness. This is below." The voice echoed within me. I saw a terrifying, enormous figure grinning at me. Fear overwhelmed me, and I wanted to run, to wake up from all of this. But suddenly my body was flung upward with tremendous force, as quickly as I had fallen. I shot back up, passing through layers, clouds, and sky. Then silence. The howl of a dog and the chirping of crickets began to be heard. The night wind brushed against my skin. I jolted awake, finding myself still lying on the floor, my body drenched in cold sweat. My head was dizzy, my body exhausted, but my soul was filled with questions. What had just happened? To this day, I am still searching for the answer. Spiritual awakening in the perspective of quantum energy and modern philosophy. The story of the spiritual awakening between the world and eternity can be interpreted as a journey towards spiritual enlightenment that goes beyond mere religious doctrine. By understanding the concept of quantum energy, as well as modern theories in the philosophy of consciousness and the universe, we can see this journey as a reflection of the evolution of human consciousness towards deeper understanding. The experiences outlined in this story illustrate the various stages in the process of spiritual awakening, which has close connections with metaphysical theories, as well as the scientific study of quantum consciousness. Separation of consciousness from the body, quantum experiments, and parallel realities. At the beginning of the story, the protagonist experiences a phenomenon where he feels out of his body, an experience often associated with near-death experiences or astral travel. From a quantum physics perspective, this phenomenon can be explained through the concept of non-localized consciousness. The process of spiritual awakening begins when an individual's consciousness detaches itself from its attachment to the physical body and undergoes a change in its energy frequency. In this story, the main character experiences the sensation of floating and seeing his physical body from the outside, a phenomenon known as an out-of-body experience, OBE. Scientists such as Erwin Schrödinger and Eugene Wigner suggested that consciousness is not only limited to the human brain, but also has the capacity to interact with multiple possible realities. Quantum experiments, such as the double-slit experiment, have shown that particles can behave as waves or particles depending on human observation, which suggests that consciousness plays a role in shaping reality. From the perspective of quantum physics, the human body is composed of subatomic particles that vibrate at a certain frequency. When consciousness is detached, as experienced by the protagonist in the story, This can be explained through the concept of quantum superposition, where consciousness is no longer limited to one state, but can exist in multiple states simultaneously. The Orch-OR theory, developed by Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, argues that consciousness may originate from quantum processes in the brain's microstructures, microtubules. In a state of deep meditation or complete relaxation, consciousness can transcend physical boundaries and explore other dimensions. The light sensation experienced by the protagonist indicates a change in energy level, from a denser to a more ethereal state. This can be analogized to the nature of photons, particles of light that have no mass, yet can move freely in a vacuum. At this stage, the protagonist enters a reality that is no longer subject to the laws of classical physics, such as gravity, in line with the quantum non-localization principle, which states that information can move without the limitations of space and time. In the context of a spiritual awakening, this out-of-body experience can be understood as a stage of release from the limitations of the physical world, opening access for consciousness to explore a higher reality.
Spirit world, dimensions of energy and vibrational resonance. After being freed from his physical body, the protagonist finds himself in a different dimension, which consists of different layers of reality such as white clouds, floating land, and the presence of luminous entities. This image can be examined from two main perspectives: the multiverse in quantum physics and holographic reality in the theory of consciousness. In multiverse theory, the existence of parallel worlds with multiple dimensions has been a long-standing debate within the scientific community. Physicists such as Hugh Everett III with his many worlds interpretation MWI state that every decision and probability that occurs in this reality can give rise to new branching worlds. In the context of a spiritual awakening, the experience the protagonist undergoes can be interpreted as a shift in consciousness to a reality that operates at a different level of existence. Meanwhile, the concept of holographic reality developed by David Bohm and Karl Pribram states that the universe is not entirely material, but a projection of a deeper dimension. In this case, the protagonist's experience can be understood as a shift in consciousness to a more fundamental level of existence, where physical form is no longer the main limitation. When the protagonist is guided by an invisible entity to a more peaceful environment, this can be interpreted as a shift to a dimension with a higher energy frequency. This concept is consistent with string theory in quantum physics, which states that the universe is composed of various dimensions vibrating at different frequencies. In quantum physics, the superstring principle states that basic particles are not points of matter, but tiny strands of energy vibrating at specific frequencies. On a larger scale, everything in the universe, including human consciousness, can be viewed as an expression of these energy vibrational patterns. Therefore, travel to other dimensions can be explained as a transition of consciousness to a higher frequency level, which allows interaction with realities different from the physical world. In metaphysical studies, the theory of vibrational resonance states that the higher a person's level of consciousness, the higher their energy vibrations. This is in accordance with spiritual teachings which state that humans with higher consciousness tend to have mystical or transcendental experiences. The spirit world described in this story can be understood as a higher frequency reality, where entities exist that have transcended the limitations of the physical world. In the perspective of transpersonal psychology, the experience of entering this dimension can be linked to the collective consciousness developed by Carl Jung. Jung argued that humans have layers of consciousness connected to universal archetypes that are inherited from generation to generation. In this context, the spirit world is not just a place, but also a state of consciousness where individuals can access information and experiences derived from that collective source of consciousness. In addition, physicist Rupert Sheldrake proposed the theory of morphic resonance, which states that information and patterns of experience can be stored in the energy field that connects all life forms. This may explain why individuals having near-death experiences often report seeing worlds of light, meeting luminous entities, or feeling an overwhelming sense of peace because their consciousness may be connecting with these higher frequencies of reality. If the spirit world is a manifestation of a reality with a higher energy frequency, then this has profound implications for our understanding of consciousness. This concept challenges the materialistic view that considers consciousness to be a byproduct of brain activity, and instead supports the hypothesis that consciousness is fundamental and can operate beyond physical limitations. Some research in the field of quantum neurobiology, such as the Orch-OR theory developed by Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, proposes that consciousness may arise from quantum processes in the microstructure of the brain. If this theory is correct, then spiritual experiences could be a manifestation of a shift in consciousness to a deeper level of reality, rather than simply illusions or hallucinations produced by the human brain. In modern metaphysical studies, there is an assumption that human consciousness resonates with a certain frequency. The higher the level of one's consciousness, the higher the frequency of vibration. The spirit world described in this story can be understood as a higher frequency reality, where entities exist that have transcended the limitations of the physical world. Interaction with ancestors, collective memory and universal consciousness. In the protagonist's spiritual awakening, interaction with ancestors becomes an important moment that illustrates the connection between the individual and historical roots and collective knowledge. The communication that occurs in nonverbal form shows that in the spirit world, understanding is no longer limited to human language, but rather occurs through direct transmission of energy and consciousness. This concept is closely related to Rupert Sheldrake's theory of morphic resonance, which states that patterns of information and experience can be passed on in the form of collective energy fields. The ancestors in this story not only act as deceased individuals, but also as manifestations of knowledge and wisdom passed down from generation to generation. In this perspective, the protagonist not only meets his ancestors personally, but also accesses a collective energy reservoir containing experiences and lessons from the past. In the realm of quantum physics, this phenomenon can be attributed to quantum entanglement, where two particles that once interacted will remain connected despite being separated by a great distance. When applied in the context of consciousness, quantum entanglement can explain how the consciousness of ancestors and their descendants remain connected through non-physical information pathways. This reinforces the idea that spiritual legacies are not just memories in an individual's brain, but exist as energy patterns that can be accessed in certain states of consciousness. The wordless communication that occurs in the spirit world can also be attributed to quantum teleportation, where information can travel instantly without the need for a physical intermediary. This suggests that the spiritual connection with ancestors is not just an emotional attachment, but also an energetic connection that takes place continuously in universal consciousness. In this context, ancestors can be considered part of the collective consciousness as proposed by Carl Jung, who explained that there is an unconscious layer that connects individuals to universal archetypal patterns. The world of heaven, evolution of consciousness to a higher level. After experiencing interactions with the ancestors, the protagonist continues his journey towards the sky world. This place is described as a dimension inhabited by luminous entities observing from a distance. The presence of these entities reflects a higher level of consciousness, which can only be achieved after an individual undergoes a profound transformation in his or her consciousness. After passing through various experiences, the protagonist arrives at the sky world, which is inhabited by luminous entities that only observe from a distance. This depicts a higher level of consciousness that can only be attained after going through a profound spiritual transformation. From a theoretical physics perspective, this world can be linked to the holographic principle proposed by Leonard Susskind. This theory states that information in a three-dimensional universe is actually a projection of a two-dimensional surface. The spirit world described in this story can be considered as one such projection layer, accessible only to consciousnesses that have reached a certain frequency. In other words, higher reality is not a physical place that can be entered by conventional means, but a state of consciousness that can only be reached through inner purification and increased energy vibrations. When the protagonist is prohibited from approaching the familiar seat, this reflects the concept of a block universe, where the past, present and future exist simultaneously. The prohibition indicates that the protagonist has not achieved sufficient spiritual readiness to be in that dimension permanently. This can also be connected to the theory of reincarnation and the evolution of consciousness, where individuals must go through various experiences and learnings before being able to assimilate into higher levels of existence. Return to the physical world, realization and integration. After experiencing a transformative spiritual awakening, the protagonist returns to his physical body, symbolizing the final stage of spiritual awakening. This event illustrates that the individual who has undergone an expansion of consciousness now sees reality in a different way. It marks the final phase in the process of awakening consciousness, where the individual has to integrate the insights gained from the metaphysical experience into real life. In many spiritual traditions, transcendental experiences such as this are not only regarded as a journey to another world, but also as an opportunity to gain a deeper understanding of reality and oneself. In the perspective of quantum physics, this can be related to the concept of collapse of the wave function, where an evolved consciousness now sees reality in a different way. In the context of quantum mechanics, before a measurement is made, particles are in a state of superposition, that is, they can be in various possible states simultaneously. However, when measured, the wave function collapses into one observable reality. In a spiritual analogy, transcendental experiences allow individuals to see the possibilities of a wider reality, but once back in the physical world, their consciousness must collapse those possibilities into a single experience that can be understood in everyday life. This integration of experience also reflects the final stage in the transpersonal psychology model, where a person who experiences an expansion of consciousness will see the world with a broader perspective. This is in line with Abraham Maslow's concept of self-actualization and Carl Jung's stage of individuation, which emphasize the importance of incorporating spiritual experiences into an individual's consciousness to achieve a fuller understanding of oneself. Evolution of consciousness and energy alignment. The spiritual awakening experienced by the protagonist is not just an exploration of the spirit world, but is also symbolic of the evolution of human consciousness. Interactions with ancestors indicate humanity's connection to collective memory and universal consciousness, while experiences in the sky world depict a higher level of existence that can only be accessed through increased energy vibrations. The protagonist's return to the physical world signifies that deep spiritual experiences are not an end in themselves, but rather a bridge to understanding reality more broadly and integrating these insights into everyday life. Through the approaches of quantum physics, metaphysics and transpersonal psychology, this journey can be understood as a process of transformation that enables individuals to reach higher levels of understanding, both in the material and spiritual realms. It shows that human consciousness is not static, but is constantly evolving and changing along with its experience and understanding of the universe. This story is not just about life after death,